The Reverend Dr. R. Clinton Washington was born on November 2nd, 1935, in Falker County, Virginia. He was the eldest of 9 children born to Deacon Robert L. Washington and Mrs. Gladys Washington.
Growing up with my brother, what did he say, the Reverend R. Clinton Washington, I'm the oldest sister, and it was a joy. I don't know what amazing everything growing up with him. He was a very quiet person, but I was a bad person. And when we first moved we was in Virginia, we was born in Virginia. And we used to go out, he had to go out and cut wood.
One thing, we was always, for as long as I can remember, very, very close. We were always close, very close. But yet, at times we fall out though. We fall out, sit down, we didn't just fuss, but we get in fights. And most of the time I could whip him. But one time I remember he hit me so hard I thought I looked like I saw lightning. He never didn't know that he got a good one in on me that day. I was dizzy. We used to fight, but never did we stay mad. We never stay stay mad very long. We soon make up, get back together. And we, of course, slept in the same bed till I was 21 and he was 22. Slept in the same bed. And it looked like almost everything that he did, I did it sooner or later. He went to work at the post office. I went to work at the post office. And now this last one, I didn't do it on my own. When he started preaching, I really didn't want any parts of preaching. But God had called him, God called me too, so I held out as long as I could. I didn't want to really be a preacher because I was enjoying life.
He was usually the good guy. He never really jumped around and hollered and carry on with us. He was always real low-keyed and stuff, and so when he started preaching, I said maybe that's what he was meant to be, because he didn't run and jump and, get loud. He didn't play no cards or nothing with us that I can remember. But then as we was growing on up, 9 of us, my mom, my dad, we all in one house with one bathroom now. You got 3 bathrooms with one person, you still think you don't have enough space. But we all made it, never really arguing stuff. Geraldine and Mac had to take care of him, anything, because he wasn't going to argue back, he wasn't going to fight, so he was pretty low-key.
Him and Geraldine and Mac, they were fooling around with the bus. My daddy used to drive the school bus, and somehow they got the bus moved. and Daddy was all his way home, and they could see him coming, and they were doing all this stuff trying to get the bus back where he had it.
I think my daddy must started driving a school bus. So Clinton got in the school bus one day, and the bus kind of drifted down the hill some. Then he had me out there while he was inside the bus, trying to push the bus up the hill. We were trying to get the bus up the hill before Daddy got back there. Daddy came back there from wherever he was. Boy, he tore Clinton up. I guess that was the worst beating Clinton got. But then I can't remember. I don't think he beat me, because I was out there trying to push the bus up. No, I was inside the bus, and Clinton was out on the outside trying to push it up. But Daddy caught us. But I know he tore Clinton up, because I think my other brother, Max, said he was coming over the hill from my grandmother's house, where he'd been, and said he could hear Clinton hollering all the way up that road, and I know it had to be about 6 blocks around here now. He could hear Clinton hollering. So I think that's the worst beating that Clinton ever got.
I was 9 years old when he got married and moved out. So my memories started after he was grown. And I do remember babysitting for them on different occasions, us taking trips together, going down to the country or whatever, and going to church. So that was basically my memories. Once I got married and moved to North Carolina, what I really miss about him was the phone calls from him that he just seemed to know when I was going through something or dealing with a situation. The phone would ring and he would be calling to check on me.
Well, I missed a lot. I missed a lot about him. You know, he told. Well, I should mention this too. He told me years ago when I was young. He told me anytime I need anything, don't hesitate. Let him know, 'cause he would do it for me. When Lucy moved to North Carolina, he told me if I ever had a problem getting to Lucy, because one year I didn't go to Lucy's on Easter because I didn't have the money. He found out. He told me if I ever needed money to go see my sister, let him know and he'd make sure I get there. I only did it once. I called him once, and I got to admit, he was right there. I went right to North Carolina. But I misses a lot about him, you know. I just misses him. I miss all my brothers and sisters that been gone passed on.
And it was just so much fun with us all coming up together. 9 of us, wasn't nobody but us children and our parents. And it was very nice growing up with him, 'cause he was quiet. He wasn't like me and the rest of them.
He woke you up this morning. Yeah, you are. Celebrate. No one ought to beg you to celebrate. It was down. He picked you up. You ought to celebrate. If you were in trouble and he delivered you, you ought to celebrate. And if you were sick, and he healed you, you ought to celebrate. And if you've not been sick, he kept you well. From the doctor's office. You ought to celebrate.
In 1953, he moved to Washington, D.C., and joined the Jerusalem Baptist Church. He soon married and met the love of his life, Lois R. Gilbert.
My girlfriend, her name was Dolores Sailors, and we was on our way to the movie. And as we was walking, this car came by, and it was your granddaddy and a guy named Clinton Hurst. And they hollered out the car and asked us did we want to ride. And of course, we was reluctant at first. And then we said, okay. So we got in, and your grandfather said, I want that little one to sit beside me, talking about me. And so we was talking on our way to the movie, and he asked me for my telephone number. And I gave it to him. And he started calling me, and so that was how we met.
I have known Pastor Washington since I was 9 years old. And the reason being is he was dating my aunt. When my mom moved from West Virginia, my Aunt Lois has always lived with us. And I remember so vividly that one weekend he was going to take my aunt to West Virginia so that he could meet her father, Reverend G.C. Gilbert. And he was thinking about stopping along the road, having a good time with my aunt. And my mother said, oh no. When my aunt came out with her bags, here came Shirley, Aggie, and James.
Well, I really didn't see that much different. He was at home. Well, I'd start with being a good husband. He was a good husband. And we did a lot of things together, him and I. We traveled a lot. With his children, he was very disciplinarian with his children. If he told his children to be home at a certain time and they wasn't, he would know exactly where to go and find them. And they would always say, Daddy knew where we was. And he loved his grandchildren. He was just overjoyed with his grandchildren. And he always said, even from the pulpit, he would say, it would be nice if you could have your grandchildren before you have your children. And he was, I really didn't see, and the church, he was a good pastor. He knew all the members' names and addresses and telephone numbers. Now that's a pastor. He loved his parishioners.
He progressed in ministry and on January 31st, 1968, was selected by unanimous decision to be the pastor of Jerusalem Baptist Church, where he served for 40 years. He maintained the title of Pastor Emeritus until his death on December 6, 2010.
And when he was called to preach, now, my mother did say, "Now you sure you've been called to preach?" And he said yes. And my mother always said she didn't like a jackleg preacher.
He's the only one trial sermon I remember, and that was Jonah in the belly of the whale.
When Pastor was here, we had the best citywide revivals in Washington. The best in the best. And we had good preachers coming in. We just had a good citywide revival. It seemed like after Pastor went home, it seemed like things just changed. When Pastor Washington said we were having something, there was a revival, whatever we were having, you believe we were going to pack the place out. Because we knew he was going to have somebody there that we wanted to hear. It was just enjoyable.
And he said, I just bought some land. And I got to go see my land. Now, this is an excuse to hide the word and buy land without seeing it. See my land. Excuse me. And then the second man say that. Please excuse me, because I just bought these 5 your lots. I gotta go prove these animals. Now, why would it buy and not knowing that it's true? But please excuse me.
I'm pleased to be given the opportunity to report on my experience of serving for 25 years as church clerk, administrative assistant to Pastor Washington, who was the pastor of Jerusalem in Old Georgetown, who he was referred to by his peers as the Bishop of Georgetown. You know, our church family felt that Pastor Washington was the gentle shepherd who came to lead us and help us on our way. He led by example, and until the Jerusalem family became a loving, caring, and sharing family of baptized believers on the Lord Jesus Christ.
Being the oldest was it was rough because he was the oldest in his family, and when things went wrong in the house, the oldest I was always blamed, so it was rough. And he would tell me, he said, you know, you're the oldest, so I had to keep things in order. So if something got broken and I didn't do it, but I was the oldest, so it was rough, but I understood, and that has carried me through. Also, you know, I have 2 kids, and I would tell my daughter, you know, you're the oldest, and with being the oldest, it's a big responsibility.
He was pretty strict growing up, and because we had a routine you get up in the morning, you go to school. I mean, you make your bed, you go to school, you come home, you have homework, you do dinner, and then on Saturday nights, you spend Saturday pretty much getting ready for church for Sunday, and we'd be in church all day. So sometimes I would watch my friends do all these other things growing up, but we had this structure in our family where we did the same thing pretty much every week. And while when you're a young child, you think, oh, I'm not having fun. But, the positive thing about what he did by being that way is it helped me when it came time for me to raise my daughter. And so I really appreciate that he was that way, because it really helped me with not just raising my daughter, but with raising my village and my family around me as well.
He was just so generous with his time and his giving. The time he would take to do any and everything for his church members, and again with his family, his generosity was over the top.
My father's always been there for us, me and my siblings, and no matter what we needed, and I said needed, not wanted, but needed, he would make sure that we had, but not only that, he was dependable to his congregation as pastor. He was just a hands-on type of guy, type of person, and and it was no matter what you ask of him, he will always be there for you.
He's such a people person, and I think that's what I admire most, is the fact that he can walk into a room and just start talking to a room full of people he didn't even know, and people would engage back with him. He just had this big personality, and it's just bigger than life to me, and so that's something that I admired so much, and I think actually it's something that he passed on to me.
I have one memory at church one Sunday, and I was sitting in church, and I just felt like, I just didn't feel like sitting there anymore. In our church, it was a 7-Eleven across the street, and I proceeded to get up and sneak out the back door to go across the street to get a Slurpee. And I was coming back across the street, and all I know was the Slurpee was flying up in the air, and it was my father in the middle of Peachtree, smacking that Slurpee out of my hand. He was like, I can't believe you left church. And he told me to go back inside, and I went back inside with the Slurpee all over me, and he went back into the church, and he started preaching. And it was rough, but right now I'm thankful, that we were brought up in the church, because it has really, it has strengthened me, and and my faith in God is because of that.
It was a challenge, growing up. What they used to call us was PKs, pastor's kid or preacher's kid. And, it was difficult because my dad's job was the pastor. And when you're younger, you may not truly understand everything he had to do. He was a hands-on pastor. So I woke up one night, it was really, really late, and I heard just some noises. And I got up and opened my bedroom door, and I could hear my dad on the phone praying. And I think that was about the time in my life when I connected him as my dad as well as him as a pastor. And he was just praying over the phone. I'm not sure who he was talking with, but evidently someone was in need of prayer. And I had witnessed that throughout the entire time I lived with my parents. It didn't matter what time of day or night, that he was always on call. He didn't have a 9 to 5 like some of us do. He was a pastor 24/7.
Even my friends always used to think that my father was strict because he was a pastor. But that wasn't the case at all. My father always allowed us to make our mistakes and everything like that. We could go out, we could go to parties, we grew up as normal kids. My father always used to tell me that I reminded him of himself when he was younger, because my father wasn't always a pastor, and he did some things that normal kids would do also, and teenagers, and being mischievous and things like that. So he allowed us to just be kids and do things that normal kids and teenagers did, So my childhood was great, and I probably can say that for my siblings also.
I felt like he always had a place of love for everybody. Like, no matter what your station in life was, what you brought to the table, he just loved. When Robert and I first started dating, Jordan was 5. And I had brought her over to introduce her to Reverend Washington and Miss Washington. And he came to the door, he opened the door, and he said hi. I said hi, this is Jordan. And she said hi, and then she said, well, after we got into the house and we sat down and everything, she looked at him and she said, what is your name? And he said, I'm Granddaddy. And she said, Granddaddy? And he said, yes, I'm Granddaddy. And that moment for me stood out so much. I felt like it just connected us immediately as a family. Like, even though Robert and I was dating, it was like he accepted my daughter.
As I've grown to be in this family ever since I've known Laura. You could just see when I would come to visit, he would just love for his family to be around, despite even if it's total chaos going on around the house with kids running around, he would just sit there and just suck it all in. He loved his family. I was asking her hand in marriage, the old-fashioned way. And as I was doing that, he said, well, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, you know, when you marry her, you can't give her back.
That day I picked him up from Dallas, and we was coming up North Capitol Street. So instead of me making a left on Missouri Avenue, I kept straight on North Capitol to go to Whittier Street to make a left, my regular route. And he said, you need to take Missouri Avenue because it's quicker. And it found out it was quicker, but it just had more lights. But it was quicker.
This very all right. The other first two men had their priority list. They were putting what the material possession ahead of God. And whatever God has given you, don't put it ahead of Him. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all of these things will be added unto you. I was a witness here. I got in to see God first. Don't you know all you have? Where does it come from? Where does it come from, sir? It comes from God, our help, our strength, our home, our automobile, whatever you got. It's not yours. It's the Lord.
The one word that I have for Reverend Washington is faithful. It can always be said that his life was one that exemplified what it means to be faithful to his God, faithful to his calling, faithful to his family. And I know for a fact that we were family because Miss Gladys Washington and my grandmother, Beatrice Tillery, were besties. And they were neighbors. And so the families were very close together. We had pictures of each other's families. My grandmother had a picture of the Washington family in her home. And I can say that it was passed down through generations. Actually, her child was also one of my childhood friends. Jack and I went to junior high school together. And we were neighborhood friends, and we hung out. And so it carried on down through the line. The one thing that I can remember best is that it was not difficult to adapt as Clinton Washington went through his ministry journey. I grew to know first Clinton as a hard worker and family man, cab driver, who became Deacon Clinton Washington, and then Reverend Clinton Washington, and ultimately Pastor Washington. This was not a difficult transition at any point, though it was a transition for all of us and for me, but it was an easy thing because for him it was his ministry journey, and calling for him was something that he took very seriously, and he was faithful to it. And so it was easy to be able to call him by his proper title as he went from one degree of grace to the other. And he did so in a way that allowed us to see that he was faithful.
What I admired most about Reverend Washington, well, he was sort of an innovator for the young people here at the Jerusalem Baptist Church. And as a church at home, when he looked after the young people, the middle-aged and the old, Reverend Washington was the first one that allowed us to bring in a whole band to come in to play for the church. Like we had drums, guitar, organ, piano. He allowed us to do a lot of things here as youth, where other churches was just sitting back watching. Reverend Washington was having us do things, run service, particularly have our own youth revivals, where it would last for a week, where we were in charge of everything. He allowed us to do our own programs, to have fundraisers, and to, in his early days when he became pastor, Reverend Washington would come and pick the children up for choir rehearsal, usher board, and all things like that, which some pastors didn't do. And also what I admired about Reverend Washington, whatever happened in somebody's family when they were sick, all you had to do was call, and he was there no matter what time of day or night. Reverend Washington was there with the family. And you saw other pastors that didn't do that, you know, whether you were in the hospital or anything, Reverend Washington was always there. The memory for Reverend Architect Washington was, I got my start with the Progressive National Baptist Convention, actually through Miss Washington. Miss Washington told Reverend Washington that Johnny needs to go to the convention. And Reverend Washington told me, okay, you're going to the convention. When you go, you're going to have to work. And he had me do the travel team. And it was a big thing for me. I'm over there with Reverend Washington. Reverend Washington, well known throughout the convention. And I worked my way up through the youth department where I became the president of the young adult men's department. And every year when I would have a service, the first person to show up would be my pastor. Because I would look on other people, when they were president, their pastors didn't show. But my pastor and my first lady always showed and was always there for me. Like I go back to saying, even Lois, Debbie, Laura, and Robert always know, they'll tell you now that I was their oldest brother, because if I was here, Reverend Washington would say, Johnny, you go get my cleaning. Johnny, you go this place, Johnny, you go that place. And I was the one that was allowed to drive the Lincoln, and they couldn't.
He was a good pastor. He could preach. He was very friendly with everybody. He knew everybody, and everybody knew him. If you were a member here, and you've been a member here from way back in the day, he could tell you who your parents were. He could give you a rundown of all the people that he knew within your family. He knew people's names, telephone numbers by heart, and he was just, overall, he was a good man. He was a good pastor. Mom was his first church clerk. He used to always say, yeah, Sister West, she signed my certificate to preach. And that always made me feel good, because he always acknowledged her in her role as church clerk. She would follow him wherever he went, no matter where he went. He was always going somewhere. My mom was always there.
Reverend Washington and I, we worked together on the music department. I was in charge of the music department. He and I worked closely together in that while I was in the male chorus. But the things I remember about Reverend Washington is that he was a very caring person. And I really miss the conversations that he and I used to have. He used to call me late at night, and we used to sit on the phone and talk, and we used to sit in the study and talk. We just had some nice, pleasant conversation. And what I really liked about him is that he was very well known, but yet he was a person you could sit down and talk to. He knew us, he cared about us, he talked to us, he did a lot for my family.
I remember as a child standing beside Reverend Washington before he was a pastor, and I'm not sure if he was a deacon, but he was just, to me, he was just like a giant, a gentle giant, and with that voice, You know, just one that amazed you. You sitting and was mesmerized just by his voice and him talking. And then as I delved to adolescence, he gave us opportunities to grow in the church. He, you know, he had the junior deacons. He had the young adult choir where he let people do certain things, of course, with his approval. But you know, he gave us room to grow, and that was one thing that I really admired about him. He gave me an opportunity when I started an interest in photography. I was talking to him, and he gave me the opportunity to become the church photographer. And even with people coming to get married, the first recommendation he gave was me, and I really appreciated that.
One thing about Reverend Washington, well, first let me just say this. Okay. Not only was Reverend Washington my pastor, but he was my neighbor, and he was my friend. And I was more than excited when he asked me to head the youth ministry. At that time, we were called youth activities. And I've known Reverend Washington practically all my life, from my teen years up until now. And I always loved children anyway, so when I was asked to be a part of the youth activity and to head it, I was truly excited. And one thing about Reverend Washington with our young people, he always, and I do mean always, was a part of their activity and their church life. No matter what we did or where we went, he was among us. I can really remember the first time many of my youth took their first airplane ride. We were going to a Federation activity in New Hampshire. Not only was he at the airport in the beginning when we left, praying us out and calming some of the fears that some of them had by never being on an airplane before, but he was there on our return. And that meant a lot not only to the youth leaders, but to my young people. It was exciting. No matter where we went, if it was locally to the skating rink, or whether it was to a church activity in another church, he was among them. We had retreats, and on the closeout day, he was always there. So not only did my young people love him as their pastor, they loved him as his friend and somebody they could admire and talk to about anything.
I admired most about him how he loved children. And then I admired about how he kept a lot of us in-house to do talents that we didn't realize we had. I mean, for example, I wasn't a video person. I mean, I went to school for it for a minute, but you know, in the end, I ended up being a videographer here for a while, and he allowed us to basically just, you know, be ourselves. You know, he used to have some funny lines and some funny stories as you're driving. You know, as he's sitting there riding. I'm a person that like listen to music. He like listen to sermons, and so preaching would put me to sleep, but music would wake him up. So it was like, as soon as I see him doze off to go to sleep, I would try to stick the music on the radio, and all of a sudden you hear this, yeah, Lawrence, yeah, like he want to hear the sermon again. You know, he had to you put words together. You just knew when you heard that rumbling of that voice, you already can basically translate to what that means.
So what can I say about the Dr. Reverend R. Clinton Washington? You know, your grandfather always would be a special person to me, and I always have a fond and special memory in my mind because, you know, my dad died when I was in the 6th grade, and although I had, you know, a stepfather and other excellent men to, you know, fill that void, your grandfather was always one of the most respected and one of the top people that, you know, stepped in my life and showed me what a man should be and how a man should act. And first and foremost, to love God, and second and foremost, to love his family. And I've always admired that about your father. Being your grandfather,
You know, we had a lot of times when it was just him and I. As you may know, or those who watching may not know, Reverend Washington lived right around the corner from me. We lived one alley away. Just go through the alley, you was at his house, or you was at my house. So it was times when Reverend Washington would come over our house for dinner, because my grandmother loved to cook and she made some excellent meals. I miss them, but she would cook, and Reverend Washington, Miss Washington would come over, and I always remember those nights. I get excited because you know, they usually would bring Keisha, and me and Keisha would play video games all night, but Reverend Washington would always speak at the dinner table, and, you know, the first and foremost talked about God, but, you know, he just talked about family, and I always admire how everyone at the table would just listen to his stories and his tales, and one thing that I always remember about your grandfather is growing up in church, I was here almost 7 days a week. If it wasn't Bible study, it was choir rehearsal. If it wasn't choir rehearsal, it was ushering practice. But being as though I lived around the corner from him, a lot of times Reverend Washington would take me home. And it was one time we were on the way home, and he asked what radio station I like to listen to. So I put it on the rap station. First off, I was scared because I said, this is the pastor and it's rap music on the radio. But I think it was a Bone Thugs and Harmony song. I can't remember which one, but of course it was, you know, although it was on the radio and it was edited, you know, you could tell that they were talking about women and drugs and things of that nature. And your granddad just laughed. And he said, I can't believe you like to listen to this music. And he was so moved, he said, I'm going to preach about this on Sunday. And sure enough, that Sunday when we got to church, he did a sermon about the music of the days or of that time and the youth and how we needed to be role models in the future. And that was one of his sermons that I always will remember and that I listened to from start to finish. I have to be sad to admit I didn't listen to them all being a little kid, but that was one when I was young that I will always remember, because he challenged all the youth in the church that as you grow, then be respected in your community, to put God first. So as a teenager, I did a lot of public speaking. I did a lot of oratory contests and the like across the city, and Reverend Washington always helped propel and advance my speaking gift and my talent by always encouraging me and motivating me. And he was, you know, outside of my family, I think Reverend Washington was one of the people who were most proud of me whenever I did a speech. It didn't matter if he could get me on the pulpit to be the MC for a youth program or to go to a visiting church with him and give a speech. He was always proud to have me speak for him and you know, and show me off as a speaker. And he helped, you know, nurture and grow that seed that when I first started, it was kind of like a hobby. And he helped grow that seed to, you know, when I was done with my high school education, I was speaking all over the country, in different states, and doing all types of different contests and things of that nature. And so Reverend Washington was one of the people who were pivotal in advancing, you know, my love for speaking, which I still do in my job today with the federal government. I give lots of, you know, outreach presentations and things of that nature. And that all started from that, you know, that seed and that nurturing I got here at Jerusalem Baptist Church underneath Reverend Washington. So I always never got a chance to thank him for that, and I wish I did, because he was one of the motivating factors, along with my mother, that helped propel my speaking career that I still use to this day.
No matter where you went, no matter who you saw, if you was to say, I attend Jerusalem Baptist Church, everybody would know the name, everybody know Reverend Washington's name, and a lot of times if somebody felt ambitious enough, they will sit there and try to imitate his deep voice. And it was a voice that needed no mic. It would resonate from the pulpit all the way to the vestibule. And I mean, that alone, I mean, for me, carried a lot of weight as a young child, being able to carry that name through the city and just feel like everyone had warm memories, fond memories of him. And everybody would share some type of story of how he either helped them in their start of the ministry or has been there, you know, throughout their ministerial career, trying to, you know, guide them through and give them advice.
And I can say he definitely had an impact on my public speaking, like growing up as a kid. We had growing up as a kid, a lot of kids around my age in JBC. We had a little competition, say who would mess up on Sunday service. When it was what was it?
Youth
Youth Sunday. So
Yeah.
every Sunday, some people would have different parts and things of that nature. So on Sundays where I would be the guest MC, it was pretty cool to see how Reverend Washington was preparing inside of his pastor study, and he would ask you if you needed help always. He would say like, any questions? I always felt like I can be comfortable, ask him anything. And then it was pretty cool to get a behind the scenes look and see like the preparation he goes through. And then once he steps out on the pulpit and gets ready, and it was a good experience to sit back and see how he orchestrates the service like that. So, and a lot of times he would sit there in between service. He'll tell me like on the program what things to introduce first and second like that. So he'll make sure I'm comfortable. He'll make sure if he see I'm nervous, or he'll tell me, hey, slow down when you're introducing this person, or things like that. So I would definitely say he was an impact on my public speaking growing up.
He will bless you with wisdom. And I come to tell you, if you open your hand up to God, God will open up his hands to you, and God's hand is always bigger than your hand.
His reputation loomed large in Washington, D.C., and so I was intimidated by virtue of his reputation, but also by the stern look on his face, and further by the fact that I was in his house, sitting in his living room, to have him basically set me up to be quizzed for ordination. So I went through that first meeting, and I did not think that it went very well. He did give me some materials to study, and we set up regular meetings where I would be interviewed by him, and he would track my progress for learning. But I did hear much later, I overheard Pastor Washington talking to another preacher, and I learned many things just by overhearing him talking to other preachers. And he said, well, that Limerick, I loved him from the moment I first met him. And then he had a big old smile, and by this point I had learned that big smile was something in his repertoire.
One, I have a lot of memories, but one in particular, when I went years ago, when I started preaching, I didn't first preach at Jerusalem Baptist Church. I went off to help another ministry because at that time, Baptist churches, a lot of them, they did not look at young children as preachers. So I went off and preached, and Pastor Washington found out, and I'll never forget, it was at Pastor Streeter's church for a revival, or it was a church service. And so I was there, I was sitting in the pulpit, and lo and behold, 2 seconds later, Pastor Washington pops up, and he sits right next to me. He says to me, he leaned over and said to me, Doc, I heard you've been preaching. You have a license? I said, yes, sir. I showed him my preacher's license, and he never said anything after that. So later on, I was asked to preside, be the MC for the men's course day at Jerusalem at this church, Jerusalem Baptist Church. And when I was MCing the program, Pastor Washington, like he always does, he got up for pastoral comments. My mother was a deaconess at this church, and my father was a deacon at this church. He got up and said, Deacon Crawford, you know he's coming back home. Ain't that right, David? All I could say, yes. In a couple of months, I think that was in 99, a couple of months later, here I came back to Jerusalem.
Well, one of the things, he was a friend of preachers. Clinton Washington, whenever a pastor came into town, he was one of the first ones to reach out to that pastor. And one of the things that he
was famous for saying, and it was so true, that there are two types of pastors: those who are in D.C. and those who want to get to D.C. And he made sure, as I said a few moments ago, that numerous pastors came into the city, and he wrapped his arms around them while they were here. For example, I can think of myself here at Mount Moriah, largely responsible for me being here. Also, Dr. Kendrick Curry at Pennsylvania Avenue, largely responsible for him being there. Dr. Joseph Evans, when he was at Mount Carmel Baptist Church, responsible for him being there. And I can go on and on and on and on and on. When I went into ministry, he was there. And one of the things that he stressed to me from the very beginning was the importance of me going to seminary. I had already done my undergraduate degree, and I was deciding upon going to seminary. And he emphasized to me the importance of getting an education. Then about 5.5 years later, my late uncle, Reverend Bernard Adams, was being buried, and I did the eulogy, and the Washingtons were there, including our Clint Washington. And I said, Clint, tell me what churches are open in D.C. And I was pastoring the Mount Sinai Baptist Church in Madison Heights, Virginia then. And he said, I think you would consider Mount Sinai Baptist Church. And he began to tell me about Pastor Durham and the church and all of that. And I never forget it. In mid-sentence, he said to me, he said, no, you are a Virginia Union man. I'm a graduate of Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology, Virginia Union University. He said, you are a Virginia Union man. He said, Mount Moriah is the place you need to be because they love Virginia Union men. I'm the sixth pastor in 135 years, and the last 3 have been Virginia Union men.
I have so many memories of Reverend Washington, but one that comes to mind is when he stayed with us one summer. He would come to Virginia every year to do revival in the country, but this year he stayed at our house. But when he stayed at our house, I didn't know that I would have to take care of him. My mom and dad went to work every day, and I was home with Reverend Washington. When he woke up in the morning, he expected breakfast, and he expected me to cook breakfast for him. I can't even remember how old I was, and that if I had ever made a full breakfast for anybody, but I was so proud that I was able to make breakfast for him. But first, I was like, does he really expect me to do this? But every morning he would get up, I would have to make him breakfast, make him coffee, and have it at the table for him. But I will never forget that time because we were able to sit and talk and share, and I learned so much from him. But when it was time for him to go, I said, oh my gosh, I don't have anybody to make breakfast for anymore. But I will never, ever forget that summer. It was amazing how strong he was. He was strong in the Lord. He was strong in the faith, but his strength also was able to carry the loads and burdens of all of his family and his church members. He took on so much, and he allowed himself to be, I guess to use one of those church words, a burden bearer, that he would take on our cares and concerns, and he would walk with us through every storm, and it was just amazing. So his strength is one thing I admire about him.
I would use the word generous, and not only in the sense of the things that he had that he was ready to share, but that the qualities that he had, he was also ready to share. So his kindness and his heart and the way that he loved people, he was just really generous with his emotions and generous with sharing like how he felt. And that's the word that I would use to describe him. So the first story that comes to mind is that Granddaddy would ask me to type sermons for him. So he had these notebooks, and it had these sermons that he had written out, and he wanted certain ones typed. And so sometimes I would type them. Sometimes my mom would also type them, so she also has this similar memory. But I would type them, and sometimes he wouldn't preach that sermon. And then he had bought me a typewriter, and I'm thinking that, oh, it's cool, it's a typewriter, I can use this for school. But I really think that he wanted me to use that typewriter to type his sermons. And I kept that typewriter for a long time, even after nobody was using typewriters anymore. So that's one funny story. And then another funny story is when I was dating my husband, John. We, obviously we're dating, so I would come in late. And Granddaddy would say, "You keeping some late hours?" And I just thought that was so funny, just the way he was trying to get me to say, "You need to get in the house earlier and not come in so late." But he'd say, "You keeping some late hours." And it was just, that is a funny memory that I have.
My most fond memory of him is him being in the pulpit and me being on the usher board and in the back hearing him preach. Like, that memory stays in my mind. I know I talk to a lot of preachers' kids or preachers' grandkids, and they say how difficult it was having a grandfather or a parent being a pastor, but not for me. I mean, Granddaddy was always open and he was understanding, and that's one thing I miss about him. It didn't matter where we were. Everyone knew who he was. He can walk into the room and he would just take the room. Like, you had no choice but to look up and smile.
So my grandfather was definitely influential to me and my family in general. He was definitely the king. He was definitely the alpha of the family. We all looked up to him, and we could never do anything wrong when it came to my grandfather. I know as grandchildren, we could never do anything wrong when it came to our grandfather. So he was very important to me growing up, because no matter the situation or what you went through in life, he didn't do the judgmental thing. Because I think Granddad came from a different side, two different sides of life. Like, he has family that went through stuff, he has family that didn't go through stuff. So for us as grandkids, he didn't look at us as anything but, like, no matter what. I know when I was a child, I was pretty bad. So Granddad never said anything to me about that. He always just looked at me as always telling me to continue to do something positive and continue to have a positive outlook on life. So that was very important for me.
My grandfather was a big inspiration to my life. From me doing productions, what I'm doing now. By the way, I used to record his sermons when I was a kid, all the way until he retired. One thing I admire about him the most, he was like Superman. If you need him, he will be there. Doesn't matter what time, any time of the day. He makes sure he will be there. He will pray over you. He will give you some advice. Or, child like me, if I needed a ride, he would pick me up.
Times when I was at my Nana's house, Granddaddy used to just be watching TV or just, reading a newspaper and just really just chilling, having, just good conversations with him, like teaching me, things that I need to know about, like principles of being a man and knowing how to take care of a household and everything that I need to know, to become a better man. And another thing is that when you're driving, you should know where you're going. Like, don't use no GPS around him, because then he feel like you don't know your way.
When I think of a favorite memory, it honestly has to be when Granddaddy went to Orlando with us. We were at like the Tower of Terror, and I love that ride. And so we were like going on it like 1 and 2 times, and so I wanted to get on again, but nobody else wanted to get on. But Granddaddy was like, "I'll go with you, baby." And so that was like my favorite moment, because it was just the two of us on this Tower of Terror, and he's older, so it was a surprise, but it was so cool. That's one of my favorite memories. It was like I saw him in like a sense of power as a pastor, but then we would leave and he was just so soft, and he was still like that powerful man you looked up to, but at the same time it was a different vibe. But when you saw him up there pastoring, you just saw everybody locked in, and I would observe that. I kind of had a love-hate with him, like pastoring, because early on, my parents and I, we decided to go to another church, and when we would come back to Jerusalem to visit, I already knew I had to do like the tithes and offering, and like what kind of giver does the Lord love? The Lord loveth the cheap. Like like that is one of, like, honestly, one of my other fondest memories of just him being a pastor, but also having like that soft side of being, just happy that his granddaughter was there to visit him. So
I remember always waking up, or if I was coming back from school, always in the morning or afternoon, coming home, and he's sitting at his chair. If it's morning, he reading his paper, or at night he just might be doing some work at the table, and he would always ask me the same questions every time I would come down there. I'm just a kid, so I don't know, much better, but he just always wanted to make sure that I was doing good. He wouldn't make it any more complicated or anything extra, just like, you doing good. And it was something in his voice I could tell, like, no matter what I say, he knew if it was accurate or not.
I have a lot of memories. I would say one of my favorite ones is how Reverend Washington would always talk about my mother as his first convert.
My name is Juanita Logan, and I was Reverend Washington's first convert. The one word I would use to describe him would be inspiring.
When I think of a father, he's the standard. When I think of a pastor, he's the standard. When I think of someone that brings the word of God, he's the standard. When I think of someone that can have a positive impact on other people, he's definitely the standard. When I think about a husband, and now that I'm a husband and a father, he's also the standard as well. It didn't really hit me until we were in the hotel and everybody was there and I was walking in the door, and it kind of went from the abstract to the real that, wow, like, not only is he Reverend Washington, but this is, Keisha's granddaddy. Keisha is, that's his grandbaby, and I'm about to ask him and to get his blessing. That meant the world to me. And, I'll never forget, him saying that, she's spoiled. So I know that he was always honest with me. And I remember, at that moment, I remember thinking back to him asking me if I wanted to ride to New York to see her off. And I found out later that I don't even think he asked her before asking me if I wanted to go with him. But knowing him now, that sounds like him. He sets things in motion, and he gets stuff done.
I remember it was one summer, about 10 years ago almost, and we went over to Nana's house, and great-granddaddy was sitting in a big chair in the corner of the sitting room, and I said hi, and I realized he had his pajamas on inside out. And it was really interesting, because, it was just my one memory of him, and I like that because it's a nice memory. It's something that's like comforting, and yeah, it's really nice.
In December of 2011, the Reverend R. Clinton Washington Scholarship was established by Mrs. Lois R. Washington and family to provide scholarship awards to eligible candidates of the Washington, D.C. community. His wife, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren continue to cherish his memory and uphold the legacy of service, compassion, and gratitude that he left behind.
So the Reverend Washington Scholarship helped me at A&T simply because I knew that college was expensive, and essentially I applied for a lot of scholarships, but I didn't get most of them, and that kind of put me in a state of me just knowing that I wasn't going to get one. And so when I found out that my own church home was doing the scholarship, I just simply applied for it. Even at the time, I didn't know that I was the only one who actually applied for it, because essentially I was the only senior that year. And so I got blessed to actually be the first recipient of the scholarship. And it definitely helped me because, like I said, college is expensive. And so $1,000 may not seem like a lot, but in all actuality, that's money that I did not have to find through a Sally Mae or through anybody in my family that Reverend Washington was able to give that to me personally, I felt like. And it definitely did help with books, different like groceries that I would need for myself on campus or anything like that that I needed. That money was able to be used for what it was supposed to be used for. And so I was grateful for the opportunity to actually have that money and have that scholarship. And even a lot of the kids at church were actually very happy for me to be able to obtain that scholarship. And they knew that that was something else that they could look forward to as well. Especially because like times are especially hard. And just being able to know that I had the great opportunity to be a part of something like that definitely changed my life.
Lastly, I would like to say about Pastor Washington. He walked with giants but kept the common touch. I will always remember Pastor R. Clinton Washington.
Some of the memories I remember at Jerusalem was just being a youth in the Jerusalem Baptist Church. I mean, we had endless support, whether it was us going to Sesame Place. I think we went to, that was before you went to Sesame Place at one point. We used to always go to Six Flags over New Jersey. So whenever the Youth Activities Committee came up with ideas for things to do, he would get up there, we would have fundraisers, we would raise the offering, but he always made sure that the youth of Jerusalem were having fun.
Reverend Washington will always be a pastor here that I will remember when I think of Jerusalem Baptist Church, because he was the shepherd and the man that introduced me to God, be it Vacation Bible School, be it Bible study, be it Sunday mornings on the pulpit. Reverend Washington knew how to feed the word to every member in this congregation, and it didn't matter if you were a young person or the oldest member of the congregation, you received that message. So I will always remember Reverend Washington, and I will always miss Reverend Washington, and I will always be grateful to Reverend Washington for instilling in me a seed or a spirit of peace, a spirit of love, a spirit that knows God, a spirit that likes to help others. All of these things I got here, growing up in Jerusalem Baptist Church, and I got mainly from the great Dr. Reverend R. Clinton Washington.
Now, I've mentioned some other things, but the one incident I would like to highlight is how I was able to navigate my calling, and the joy that I felt when I understood that Pastor Washington already knew God had already spoken to him. And while I prayed and cried before I went to visit to share my calling with him, I never had to say anything. I went into his office and he said, "Neat, have a seat." And I sat down and the telephone rang. And it was one of the senior members on the phone, and he proceeded to pray with her and talk with her. And that was a wonderful example, not knowing where I would end up. But then when he hung up the phone, he looked at me and he said, "Neat, this is how it's done." I never had to tell him about the calling. He already knew. God had already prepared him. And that for me was something to behold. And so again, I thank God for fond memories. I thank God for faithfulness. And I thank God for the memory of the Reverend R. Clinton Washington.
Reverend Washington impacted my life through his caring for other people and how he would take time for other people. And one story that comes to mind is I was visiting a friend in the hospital at Washington Hospital Center, and she was terminally ill. And while I was sitting in the hospital, I heard this voice, and I knew whose voice that was. Nobody had a voice like Reverend Washington. I ran out in the hall, and he was there visiting another church member. And he asked me what I was doing there. I said, well, I'm here with one of my girlfriends who's really sick. And he said, what room is she in? And I told him. He followed me to the room. And he took the time to pray for her. He had never met her before. But I loved how he was there to support someone who was special to me. And his sense of caring and concern for other people. And I know that some days he was visiting people all day long, and I know he had to be tired. But he took special care in how he treated other people. And I learned so much from that we have to take time to be there. It doesn't matter what's going on in our life, but just taking the time to care and show concern for other people. And I saw that in his life, and that's something that I've taken with me.
I have a few memories of Reverend Washington. I think he was the greatest pastor ever, especially like I'm only 23 right now, but just in my entire life, that was who my pastor was. And so I knew that he knew of not only him, but even Mrs. Washington. Like, they were very proud of all of the work that we were doing, especially as kids, when it comes to like me and Jade. Me and Jade grew up together. And so having her as my best friend and just being able to grow up as one definitely, definitely helped me in my journey. And so being able to have Reverend Washington as a pastor, he definitely instilled a lot of growth and knowledge into me. I was a part of so many different things, like the dance ministry, ushers ministry, the choir, and even like Sunday school activities and things like that. I was a very active member of my church, even when I was young. And so I feel like knowing that, and Reverend Washington also knowing that, I definitely made him proud throughout my life. And especially graduating college, I always thought of him as well, just especially even having that scholarship and having the opportunity to have that scholarship and be a part of something bigger. I know that he's looking down now and he's proud of not only the accomplishments that I have made, but all of the accomplishments that all of the kids in Jerusalem Baptist Church has made, because I can look at all of us now and everyone is doing exactly what he would want us to be doing. And so I'm grateful for not only him being my pastor, but Jerusalem Baptist Church being my home church, because everyone instilled something most powerful in me, and I couldn't ask for a better family, and I definitely couldn't have asked for a better pastor.
A lot of things that I am today is because of what started here. 1994, I remember we got those vans, that new gray Dodge van, and I just looked at the van and just made a comment out there on that front saying, I want to drive that van around the corner. Not only did I drive the van around the corner, I ended up being part of the transportation ministry, which led into my career now. 20 years later, I'm still here driving people around. So I owe it all to my beginnings here. So I thank God for the relationship, the friendship. I miss him, but I know he's in a better place resting in Jesus. And I just thank God to be a part of the family.
Oh, I miss so much about him. I told Robert and Lois and Laura not too long ago that if Auckland, Washington was still living, some of the things that have happened in my life over the last 10 years, some of my struggles, some of my trials, some of my failures would not have happened because he would have been around to talk to. We talked 3 or 4 times a week, and just having that opportunity to glean knowledge from a senior sage is invaluable. I also missing having him as a person that I can pick up the phone to call and get advice from, because he had such a wealth of knowledge.
So I just like to say, Reverend Washington, I miss him. There'll never be nobody else like him.
Well, Reverend Washington was dear to our family. His friendship with my uncle was meaningful, and which spilled over to me as a member of the male chorus, and I saw how they dealt with things, and so just to see what they did, it gave me an opportunity to see how to carry myself as a man. I admired him in the way he pastored. I admired his love for people. And what really sort of impressed me was the fact that he knew your telephone number, he knew your tag number on your car. If he saw family members, he talked to them. His pastoral care was over the top. Everything that he did as a pastor, to me, he was a pastor, a friend, and somebody that I would look up and would never forget.
Well, what I miss most about him, I can say this, was his camaraderie. I was always looked at, people asking me, was I in Washington, for one thing. And some people even would ask me, are you Reverend Washington's son? And even till this day, people always ask me, am I in the Washington family? Reverend Washington and I would go places, we would get, just like any father-son combination, we would get mad at each other and wouldn't talk to each other for a while, but we always came back together for the common good, which was the blood of Christ. Reverend Washington would call me at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, Johnny, I have to go to North Carolina and I'm coming to pick you up in a half hour. And so if it was a funeral out of town, or even just to go visit Robert when he was at Virginia Union, we would be leaving home. Reverend Washington just looked out for everybody.
Even when like rewarding, like my era, what I remember is like even we look forward to staying on the honor roll because we knew we would get honored at church we get recognized for honor roll, school attendance, achievement if you graduated. So any time at the end of the school year, we always look forward to getting an award from JBC and always from Reverend Washington, shaking his hand, getting recognized at the front of the pulpit. That was something that we always look forward to.
Pastor Washington has always been in my life since 8 years old. As I got to be an adult, he was there for me when my sister Shirley passed. When they pronounced her dead, 5 minutes, he was coming down the hall of Howard University Hospital. He was there when my mom passed. He was there when my husband Willie passed. And he's just been not just an uncle, he was a friend and my pastor. Pastor Washington was a friend to all of the family, friends at other churches, pastors around the world. Everybody knew him to be loving, caring, and sharing. And I, at this time, want to thank my aunt for sharing him with the world. Pastor Washington will always be special to me. I will always remember him, always love him, and to me, he will be the pastor for life. Reverend Dr. R. Clinton Washington.
I miss his voice. I miss seeing him. I miss hugging him. I miss the way he smelled, his cologne. I miss the faces that he would make. He made some really funny expressions. I think that's where I get my facial expressions. But really everything. I can't think of one particular thing that I miss. I miss everything about him.
Khalid would be rotten, and he has a lot of characteristics that Granddaddy had himself. But I think that Granddaddy would love the great grands. They all have a part of him. Ava and Khalid really remind me of him a lot with their personalities. So I definitely think, and then Little Mo. We can't even get into Little Mo. He would love Little Mo. And then now you got Mariah, And he would just be filled with joy. I just know he would, because that's how we was. You remember, we're the original four. Sorry, Lauren and Elvin, but the original four. Like, we went everywhere with him. I would stay at great grandma's house. Like, anywhere that he went, I wanted to go.
You know, moments like Thanksgiving was definitely huge. Like, I just saw the way that, you know, he spoke to us and how he really was just a positive role model for everybody. He wanted the best for everybody. He wanted everybody to realize that, you know, the circle around you was a huge blessing, and it's something that you shouldn't take for granted and that you should be thankful for. And I truly believe that, you know, having my own daughter now and my husband, you know, we're tight as tight can be. And I attribute that a lot to my grandfather, because he just taught like the value of family and how you need to love each other through all the ups and downs, and be there for each other and be a listening ear, all of that. You know, he was everything. He's everything I strive to be like. I'm not there, but I definitely strive to be just like Granddaddy.
My grandfather was always proud of his grandkids. He would love to brag about us. Sunday morning service, we were getting called to the pulpit. Doesn't matter with me with a football trophy, me doing good in school, he would just brag about us.
Granddad was this it. All holidays, Christmas vacations, whatever we was doing, we just always looked forward to seeing our grandfather. So that's very important to me to even know because some people don't even know their grandfather. So I got to know mine's on both sides of my family. So I do appreciate that.
Kept the family close, and he was like the glue of that. And you know, he always kept it close. He always made sure like we put family first. And like I hope, you know, we continue doing that, and I think that's what he really wanted, just to keep us, you know, sticking together through thick and thin.
Man, I remember, and even if I didn't remember, you know, my family be telling me, you know, we be at church and like, you know, the third, you know, he can speak French, and you know, he would call me up and like say something. I'm just like, you know, in my head, I'm like, I don't want no attention. And you know, thinking back to it, I remember it was just always embarrassing for me because I didn't want to, you know, do too much in front of too many people, or, you know, always have to stand up and speak French. But looking back, is definitely a tribute to his pride in me, and I just hope that I'm still making him proud to this day.
Just from hearing him preaching and calling up saying, how are you doing? So every December the 6th, we think about him.
And he would say, I'm going to read the 121st Psalms, and then I'm going to pray with you. And that's what he did. And that is what I really miss. And I do know that he loved his family, and he would do anything for us. I miss my big brother.
So I never shall forget him. If I live to be 150 years old, I'll never forget about my brother, Reverend Dr. Ira Clinton Washington.
That for sure. I miss that, you know, that he doesn't know my granddaughter, you know, but I'm thankful that he got to know his grandchildren, you know, and that his grandchildren got to know him. But I miss his, I think his presence more than anything, just being there.
Him just not being here. I miss his voice. I miss being able to share things with him when regarding, you know, what's going on with me in life, what's going on with my kids, grandkids, and I think he would be so proud of the way his grandchildren have grown up, and just to see all of his great-grands.
I miss everything about him. I miss going to him, you know, talking to him. you know, when I need somebody to talk to and give me advice, no matter, you know, what it is or what I'm going through, I could always talk to him. So I really miss just having his ear to just help me through and to give me that guidance. And that's what I miss the most.
I would probably say his presence is the most thing that I miss, and I probably can say that for my entire family, because especially during the holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas and just family gatherings, because my father was a family man, and he loved family, and he loved family gatherings, and just to see his family and everything, he would just light up, and especially with his grandchildren, because he was so proud of his grandkids, and because my mother would always used to say that there is something different when it comes to grandchildren, you know, and you know, of course you love your own children, but grandchildren hold a special place in a grandparent's heart. And you know, me and my sisters noticed that, because the grandkids get away with everything, you know, and if we was to do half the stuff that the grandkids was doing, you know, we'd probably be strung up against the wall somewhere. But it's definitely his presence.
I miss him coming in the house. When he would come in, first thing he would say, "Lois." He would call my name. And I said, "Yes." And when he called my name, I knew what he wanted. He wanted to know if dinner was ready, or he was ready to eat. And I miss his presence. I miss his presence. I miss being with him.
To God be the glory.
Walk together, children. Don't get weary. Gonna be a great camp meeting on the other side.